Welcome to StopFake, the place where we set the record straight on fakes about Ukraine. I'm Kyiv Post Chief Editor Brian Bonner with StopFake's latest dissection of Russian alternate reality. This week's disinformation menu brings you the following. Kyiv sanctions against Russian banks worsen Ukraine's investment climate. Visa-free travel to the EU will flood Europe with Ukrainian radicals and prostitutes. And the Kremlin competes to outperform itself in cynicism about Eurovision. That and more in this week's StopFake Digest. So let's get to the details. Ukraine's sanctions this week against 5 Russian banks has brought a deluge of stories in the Russian media warning Ukraine that it has shot itself in the foot with this move by worsening its own investment possibilities. Russian state agency TASS claims this move is a great loss for Ukraine, as Russian banks are the main investors in the Ukrainian economy. Kommersant newspaper writes that Russian banks make up more than 10% of Ukraine's financial market, and that the sanctions will have negative consequences on business and will likely cause panic among depositors. These sanctions will primarily hurt Ukraine, declares RIA Novosti. Others have predicted similar negative effects. The facts, according to the National Bank of Ukraine, are that Russian banks make up only 8.8% of the Ukrainian financial services market. And over the last 3 years, the number of branches of the sanctions bank has shrunk by nearly 50%. All 5 banks in question are subsidiaries of 3 Russian state-owned banks, Sberbank, VTB, and Prominvestbank. The sanctions are Kyiv's response against Russia's sponsorship for the separatists in the east of the country, and they are aimed at stopping capital flight from the bank's Ukrainian affiliates back to Russia and abroad. The banks themselves aren't panicking. Sberbank, for example, said in a statement that the sanctions have nothing to do with the bank's commercial activities and will not affect the client's interests. VTB President Konstantin Weissman, meanwhile, pointed out that no Russian bank has left Ukraine in recent years. Quite to the contrary, they are expanding their operations. As Ukraine draws ever closer to visa-free travel in the European Union, Russian media are making ever more outrageous pronouncements as to what this new travel arrangement will bring. Europe will be flooded with illegal Ukrainian migrants, radicals, and prostitutes. Visa-free travel will be short-lived. Ukrainians' dreams of Europe will prove to be an empty bubble, as they will not be allowed to work in the EU, proclaimed the usual Russian media suspects. Russian Defense Ministry television channel Zvezda devoted its entire weekly talk show process to Ukraine-EU relations, calling the visa-free travel arrangement a grandiose deceit, a vast special operation that the West has long been preparing for Ukraine. Another claim is that Ukraine and Georgia, another former Soviet state negotiating visa-free travel to the EU, will repay the EU by accepting refugees bound for Europe. We at StopFake have previously debunked many of these ridiculous Russian claims. The facts are that work visas have never been part of the visa-free negotiations between Ukraine and the EU. The Ukrainian government has been very clear about this, and the issue has been written about by countless times in numerous Ukrainian publications. Ukrainians understand that visa-free travel to EU countries is limited to 90-day tourist stays and is limited to the 26 Schengen zone countries. That excludes Great Britain and Ireland, which are not a part of the Schengen zone. Russia fake claims about Ukrainian visa-free travel are exactly what they appear to be: lies and sour grapes. Obtaining a Schengen visa for Ukrainians is complicated and at a cost of 60 euros, expensive. It also requires scores of documents, including bank statements, employment contracts, tax returns, and medical insurance. Russophobic paranoia is on the rise in gangster country. That's how Russian media characterized Ukraine's banning of Russia's entry for the 2017 Eurovision Song Contest singer Yulia Samoylova, who is prohibited from entering the country for the May final in Kyiv. Russia's foreign ministry said the move proved that Ukraine is riddled with Russophobic paranoia and nationalistic complexes, while Samoylova expressed surprise that Ukraine felt threatened by her. Quote, "What did they see in me? Such a small girl. They saw a threat," Samoylova told Russia's Channel 1 state news program. Samoylova was banned from entering Ukraine because she contravened Ukrainian law by an illegal visit to Crimea. Occupied by invading Russian troops in 2014, the Ukrainian peninsula was subsequently annexed by Moscow in a move condemned as illegal by the rest of the world. The singer performed in Crimea in 2015 knowing she was breaking the law. RIA Novosti implies that Germany in particular opposes Ukraine's ban and tries to support that perception by picking out comments from Germany's official Eurovision website that only decry Ukraine's decision. But it becomes obvious to anyone examining the 50 or so comments on the site that there is a variety of sentiment expressed, some supporting Ukraine's move, others criticizing it. Meanwhile, Russian producer Joseph Prigozhin, in a comment for Life News, advocates Russia pulling out of Eurovision altogether. Let's look their tolerance in the face. A bearded woman is more important to them than a person in a wheelchair, he said. That was a reference to the bearded Conchita Wurst, an Austrian pop artist and drag queen who won the 2014 Eurovision contest. Samoylova was selected as Russia's entry for Eurovision by the country's leading state-owned broadcaster, Channel One, earlier this month. The singer has suffered from spinal muscular atrophy since she was a teenager and is wheelchair-bound. In a statement, Eurovision contest organizer, the European Broadcast Union, said they are disappointed by Ukraine's decision but must respect the local laws of the host country. The Kremlin was well aware that Ukraine had imposed similar travel bans on scores of Russian citizens, including performers, as well as Europeans. Kyiv insists visitors enter Crimea legally via the Ukrainian mainland, where they must comply with Ukrainian immigration procedures. Many in Ukraine and elsewhere believe Moscow anticipated Kyiv would ban Samoylova and cynically chose her to exploit her handicap in order to portray Ukrainians as uncompassionate and hard-hearted. That's it for this week. You can get more information about these stories and more on our website. Give us a click. Be vigilant, beware of fakes. If you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, send it to us for a truth autopsy. Remember, consuming fake news is bad for your health, bad for your brain, and bad for the psychological climate of society. I'm Brian Bonner, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.